You can see the product blowing out of those vineyards, right out of those vineyards, into the residential area. Now those guys in the bucky are going to be sprayed. Now if that isn't a violation of product label, then I wouldn't know.
Morning everyone, so I'm Sasha. I'm an advocacy researcher and I've been doing a lot of research around the issue of the big agri-push in the context of Africa, and I've got a very keen interest in researching pesticide-related issues. I'm an associate. I'm also working with the South African Organic Sector Body and PGS SA. In the context of my involvement in this research work, I have co-founded a few years ago, 2 years ago, an association called GMO-Poison Free Zones. And I will be telling you a little bit about that. Sorry, I realized I didn't put my video to just briefly show face. Hello. And I'm going to be sharing my screen now because I've put together a little PowerPoint. Thank you very much. Okay, so just to frame the webinar a little bit, this is the first of a series that we're hoping to have going in the weeks and months to come on Poisons Africa, and this is the one focusing on air because it's relating to pesticide drift. I have over the past year researched the issue of pesticide drift in South Africa and compiled a paper that is being finalized and will be published at the end of the month, looking at pesticide drift and calling for a specific regulatory framework around it, essentially calling for the mandating of buffer zones and other measures. So my colleague, who's a water toxicologist, and myself reviewed a couple of case studies. These are based in the Western Cape, and I'm not going to go into the detail of these because we're going to be hearing first-hand stories from the people directly impacted on the ground. What this paper also does is that it unpacks a little bit how deeply entrenched the agrochemical regime is in South Africa. And importantly, it looks at international precedents around the regulatory frameworks put in place to mandate buffer zones. And we were very interested in those precedents because we really feel this is high time that such measures be put in place in South Africa. So I'm going to be running briefly through some salient points that I just want to share with the people gathered today, because I think it's important we all clear on the issue at hand. So obviously people will know that pesticide drift is the drifting of spray and dust from pesticides applications. It's an externality that's directly related to chemical farming, and in a sense, no one's really being held accountable for it. We've got a very deficient legal framework regulating the issue in South Africa. And basically it narrows the regulations to spraying protocols and product specifications. And there's hardly any consideration given to occupational health and the health issues of impacted communities and obviously long-term environmental impacts. It seems also that the departments one would assume are responsible for managing the issue are kind of passing the responsibility to one another. The Department of Labor is effectively responsible for ensuring that pesticide drift doesn't in fact impact or injure third parties. But in practice, whenever there's a matter of pesticide drift, they will refer it to the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. And when these people come and investigate, if they do come, they will not look really into compliance with product label, but just really look at what's happening on farm. So yeah, we just have a lack of adequate legal framework on
Sasha,
this issue. So
would you like to just do the presentation view?
I'm trying to find it.
There it is. There you go.
Makes my life easier. Thank you. So what's important to bear in mind is that this problem is not going away anytime soon, because what's happening is that the pesticide intensive sectors, which is the orchards, the vineyards, the berry sector, the citrus industry, these are like growing incrementally in the country. In the past growing season, the tangerine mandarin sector, for instance, grew by 8%. If you look at the blueberry sector, the growth of this sector is expected to double between 2019 and 2023. A lot of this growth is going to happen in the Western Cape, and our case studies actually look at this sector specifically. So we're going to be encountering an incremental amount of conflicting land use, where you will have intensive agricultural growth of this sector, which is obviously happening in closer and closer proximity to urban and rural developments. And now, okay. So framing the call, the campaign for an agrochemical reform, are key issues that we need to tackle is the fact that the government, the industry, and therefore farmers are actually pushing for the flawed notion that food cannot be grown without chemicals. We've got a very biased legal framework that assumes that pesticides are just going to be the mainstay of agricultural production. So from the onset, we are set with this bias towards, the fact that pesticides are unavoidable in our food system. And the pesticide industry is making sure that this is staying as the status quo. And there has definitely been a lot of discussion already in this forum on the state of capture of our sector by the pesticide industry. So that's going to be like a very important aspect of the chemical reform that we're calling for. And that is something I really want to flag, and I think SPP would have, definitely discussed this in their advocacy work, is this critical issue of exposure to farm workers. Last year in Tanzania, we had the pesticides politics conference that was held in Tanzania. And the preamble of this conference, the conference ended with a call for action on pesticides, and it was called the Arusha Call. And the preamble of this call says that even when applied by responsible and trained users, pesticides cannot be used safely, given the insufficient protection offered by pesticide equipment under real conditions of use. So even if you've got people that are highly protected with PPE, they are still chronically potentially exposed to pesticides. They don't actually offer protection to a lot of the hazardous types of pesticides. Very briefly, some background to this campaign in the making. I want to acknowledge that 10 years ago, Jürgen and others co-founded the Air That I Breathe, the TATIP Foundation. And I'm not going to say much about it because Jürgen's going to share more about what they did at the time. But they were the avant-garde, if you may. They were the people who were pioneering this need for change in the country. Dr. Mina was one of them. He did a lot of medical research on himself, trying to prove causation and harm from pesticide exposure. 10 years later, essentially, in 2018, the GMO and Poison Free Zone little collaborative was formed, and it was formed with the intention of documenting cases of spray drift in the country, and also to set in motion instances of participatory research to monitor pesticides in the country. So we've got some ongoing research being piloted in the Eastern Cape using a drift catcher, which is basically trying to get a sense of the risk of exposure of the population in an area where there is intensive pesticide spraying ongoing throughout the year. And on the basis of this, start raising awareness and advocating for change. I want to briefly acknowledge also the other shakers and movers on the issue of agrochemicals in South Africa. Women in Farms have definitely made a lot of noise in the system last year with their petition calling for a ban of 67 pesticides that are banned in the EU. It would be very nice to hear from Women on Farm whether there has been any feedback from government to date. The African Center for Biodiversity last year published jointly with AFSA the Africa Must Ban Glyphosate Now report. So it's a Africa-wide call on the banning of glyphosate, and they waged a huge campaign around it last year. And they've done multiple pieces of research looking at how the ongoing application for stacked GMO maize varieties, which are showing multiple herbicide resistance, are just compounding this issue of toxic applications of pesticides and herbicides in the country. In 2019, I think, Anna, maybe you'll speak to that at some stage, there was a legal application made calling for an agrichemical reform in the country. So you can see that there's been a lot of momentum around the issue. I think this is definitely shaping the campaign. And then also in 2019, BioWatch managed to congregate a lot of concerned individuals and organizations to start supporting the rise of agroecology in South Africa. And it gave rise to the AESA, Agroecology South Africa. This platform structured itself in several working groups, actually from 2020 onwards, and a policy working group was set up. And this current working group that we're talking about, the agrochemical working group, forms part of this movement. And we have labeled our work unpoison. Unpoison our food, our air, our soils, our water. In terms of the work that's been done specifically around pesticide spray drift in South Africa, this is the cover of the report that will be released later this month. This was research that was funded by Action 24, and the report is a joint publication by SAOSO and GMO-Poison Free Zones. This report was produced as well as a 5 minute web doc that points towards a petition, and I will share this just after I'm done with this presentation. I'm not going to spend too much time on examples of buffer zones. I just want you to know that they're there internationally. The report details these, and it's just interesting to know what the precedents are. So in the Netherlands, for instance, they have just a framework that calls for 1 to 2 meter buffer zones. It's hardly anything. It doesn't really give adequate protection to people. In Slovenia, the buffer zones are defined by the water protection regulations. So the nature of the water bodies determine the dimensions of the buffer zones. And in France, actually from the 1st of January 2020, they have started regulating buffer zones, and there's been major negotiations with the farming industry and with a lot of NGOs. A lot of people are not happy with the outcome of these buffer zones, which currently stand at a minimal distance of 20 meters for highly hazardous pesticides, for 10 meters for agriculture, vineyards, and other trees, and then a minimal distance of 5 meters for all other cultures. These distances can be further reduced depending on the type of spraying equipment that farmers use. So just to give you an idea, there was another bill that was put in Parliament when these buffer zones were being negotiated, and some called for a 200-meter buffer zone, which was deemed far more adequate to actually really preserve non-target communities from pesticide drift.
Sasha, just to let you know, 2 more minutes so that we still have questions.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah. Sorry for the typo there. So the call for action regarding the pesticide drift, there are 8-pronged things that the paper calls for. So one thing is to minimize or prohibit pesticide use in specific areas. We should not have pesticide being sprayed around healthcare, schools, business centers, any public areas and water bodies. And we want the mandating of compulsory buffer zones that should be informed by adequate tools and protocols. We're also calling for a ban on aerial spraying, which is a widely practiced in the country. And I'm not going to read up the rest of the measures. I'll let you go through them. They also are captured in the web doc that I want to screen just now. So yeah, in a sense, this is a call for support. Anyone who's wanting to be actively engaged in documenting, for the sake of advocacy, this issue of pesticide drift, you're welcome to please put your name and specific area of interest in the chat box saying, yes, I want to be involved. I want to be involved with GMO-Poison Free Zones. For instance, in France, this is what they've done. They have called on people to share cases of pesticide drift, and look at the map of France. It shows over 400 points of people saying they are chronically impacted by pesticide drift. Conversely, there's also other platforms that are saying these are the pesticide-free areas, and it's showing this positive imagery, you know, of where we are pesticide-free. I'm going to be sharing now, Anna, if you may, it's a 4.3 minutes web doc which captures this issue, and I think images are obviously very powerful. And basically what we would like is if you agree and you want to involve your organization with this call for action, because it leads to a petition, and we still need to have this discussion about what is going to be informing our call for an agrochemical campaign. But this video focusing on pesticide drift calls for it. So you'll see on the second screen of the web doc I'm going to screen now, there's a couple of logos of organizations. So what we would like is for you to, if you want to support this action, just drop it also in the chat box and subsequently share your logo and say you're keen to support this. So some video now.
Extensive use of agrochemical remedies on fruit orchards, vineyards and croplands, which are extensively cultivated in South Africa, and the pesticide spray drift these lead to, is an important yet underreported issue. Rural communities affected by pesticide spray drift have little, if no recourse, to have their right to clean air and clean water protected. These images give a snapshot of the spray drift suffered by people in South Africa, showing how the application of pesticides at times takes place in very close proximity to people's homes, to schools, or public spaces. This footage shows how a blueberry farm producing for the export market has expanded its operations to such a point that the neighboring community has ended up surrounded by the protective netting used to cover the trees. Spraying of the trees takes place up to 3 times a week during the spraying season. However, these netting structures do not contain the pesticide drift.
And look, I don't mind them being there in the back, but I mean, this doesn't work for me. You know, you can plant whatever you want. It's not going to stop it. I mean, I need to put up a forest here to stop this. How close this is to... There's no barrier. There's nothing here.
The netting is a mere 2 meters away from the boundary fences. Their house is only 40 meters away. They are chronically exposed to pesticides.
Dag weer 'n masker op. Vandag het 'n masker op. Ja, handskoene en 'n bril en niks.
Here we see farm workers spraying pesticides. The men are not wearing protective clothing, and one of them is not wearing a mask. Even when applied by trained users, pesticides cannot be used safely given the insufficient protection offered by protective equipment under real conditions in the field.
It is the 7th of November, the gentle wind blowing straight towards our cottages. This fence is right against our cottages, and these guys are spraying here. I don't know what they're spraying, but it really stinks. It smells bad. Only the driver is wearing a mask, and one of the guys walking behind the tractor is wearing a mask. The rest are not wearing masks. So we don't know what it is, what's going on. I asked them what it is, and they wouldn't tell me what it was. So that is these guys, and they are carrying on. He's wearing a mask.
This footage was taken between 2004 and 2009. It was shot in River Castile, where a farmer regularly sprayed his vineyards. These tractors are spraying extremely hazardous pesticides, such as dicarbazole, diclovos, endosulfan, chlorpyrifos, and mancozeb. Here as well, we see that the farm workers are not wearing any form of protective clothing. They are spraying in very windy conditions, and the closest homes are located 12 meters from the vineyard farm. Several families living there suffered acute exposure to the pesticide drift. It was medically established that the cancers developed by 2 members of the one family was a direct result of this exposure. These These images are a drop in the ocean of pesticide spray drift cases in the country. The government needs to address this issue by prohibiting pesticide use in specific areas, mandating buffer zones to protect non-target rural communities and water bodies, putting in place a ban on aerial spraying, making provision for advanced warning and compensation mechanisms, and supporting farmers transitioning away from chemical pesticides. These aspects should form an integral part of a structural reform of the legal framework regulating agrochemicals in South Africa.
Yeah, thanks for your attention, and I will conclude here. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to echo something that's in the chat. I mean, what balance is there between, you know, the buffer zone studies and then also looking at delinquent farmers that are using pesticides that aren't meant to be used or registered as safe? So have you got a study on the list that's currently being used and what else might be being used, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, the list of pesticides people use, they must be registered with the Department of Agriculture. So if people are applying pesticides and are not registered, that's an unlawful action. I mean, that would be a very short answer. We are aware, actually, I have read an unpublished paper that speaks to that effect, that because it's so expensive to get rid of pesticides, that unregulated and unauthorized pesticides are still being used. And I know it's the case in the winelands. So I just need to track the author of this paper to be entitled to share it with you. But again, I think Jürgen will have more. And Elma, to your point around the doctors, yes, I think Professor Minard developed some protocols, and I know Jürgen is also aware of the type of screening that can be done to detect poisoning in your system. In terms of pesticide residues, there are a lot of basic tests that can be done to pick up on residues in urine samples and hair samples. There's wide campaigns going on with glyphosate and hair sampling in Europe. So we just need the funds to do something like this in South Africa. Yeah. Fila Sunday, do you want to please, yeah, just go ahead.
Yes, hi. The name is Kila Sande. I'm just in agreement with one of the comments in the chat box from Margie, that there is not enough of promotion of the alternatives of what people can use in place of the chemicals, and especially at the large scale that people are farming. You know, one might try to do companion planting if they are planting at a small scale, but it is usually quite a challenge to have alternatives. So maybe we should also try and incorporate that kind of talk when we talk about the cons of it, and try and open up to what else people can actually do, especially on a large scale.
Yeah, Fira Sunday, I mean, that's a critical point. I know that there are discussions at the level of CropLife, because, you know, CropLife is now the industry body that is actually on behalf of the agricultural department registering authorized pesticides. And up to now, there's been a very strong stumbling blocks to have the biopesticides officially registered there. Because you're right, like the large scale type of alternative inputs, it's not out there. And I think the obstruction was definitely at the level of the registrar. And obviously there's more awareness and training needed. And I think all the organizations in this group are trying to work towards that. Yes, thank you very much. Jürgen, the floor is yours.
Great, guys. Well, thank you for inviting me to join. I trust that you can all hear me clearly. I'm a very long way away in another continent and time zone. Before I begin, I'm going to answer just a couple of those questions. The first question is regarding MRLs in our local fruit and vegetables. Now, when I started my research way back in 2004, I came across somebody at UCT who had analyzed local fruit and vegetables in South Africa. and this is fruit and vegetables for the local market, and had found that their MRLs were in excess of 300% the minimum residue level. So in essence, they were highly toxic. That person was absolutely terrified to go public because he feared that he would be basically murdered by the fruit and vegetable industry for loss of income. So that's that question. We'd obviously need to find out who that person was. It's such a long time ago. In terms of Europe, Europe Gap, Global Gap, Nature's Choice, they supposedly monitor the fruit and veggies coming into Europe from South Africa, and they have a list of permitted pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that are allowed to be used. And every year they remove more and more from that list. So something that would have been on the list as a green, safe pesticide 5 years ago gets moved from green to amber, and from amber to red, and when it gets to red, it gets banned from the list. And basically that is that further testing on that particular pesticide, which was considered safe 10 years ago, further testing has proven that it's actually highly toxic and gives children brain cancer. So at that point, they give out a list and they stop local South African farmers spraying it on their fruit. But how do they test, and do they test? That's the million-dollar question. Anyway, think about that. A little bit about me, and if you'll just let me know, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we're hearing you loud and clear.
Yeah.
Great. So I lived in Cape Town, and I moved from Newlands to a little town called Residue. My wife and I bought an old farmhouse in middle of 2000, and we wanted to move there because we thought the air would be nice and fresh and clean, and would be a great place to start a family and bring up kids. We had our first child, everything went well, and when my wife was pregnant with the second baby, the farmer in town had bought some vacant land next to our house, and during her pregnancy, he had commenced spraying those grapes, and they were export table grapes. And when he sprayed, large clouds of pesticide blew from his vineyard through our garden, and if our windows of our house were open, blew into the house. You guys have seen the video footage. We approached him, and I approached him and I said, look, I'm concerned about the spray drift. My wife is pregnant. I don't want anything to happen to her or the baby. And he was a very arrogant farmer, and he basically said that nothing he sprays is poisonous. He used the F word. He called me an effing Englishman, and that was that. When Christopher was born in June 2004, about at the age of 5 weeks, he started having some problems. We took him to the local doctor. We then took him to a specialist in Cape Town, a pediatrician, who took one look at the child and had him admitted immediately to Constantiaberg Mediclinic. And this was in July 2004. He was 5 weeks of age. And later that day, he went into cardiac and respiratory arrest. He stopped breathing. There was no heart, there was no pulse. And it took the doctors 45 minutes of CPR to stabilize him. And in essence, they said he's not going to survive the night. Family flew from all over South Africa. He had brain seizures that first night. And he survived. And they ran some tests, some blood tests, and they all came to the conclusion that my wife's exposure to what was being sprayed while she was pregnant had an effect on him in terms of his development. And they were also spraying, while he was a newborn, and all of that just obviously had a major impact on him. So what we did is we asked the farmer to let us know what he was spraying again and again. And between 2004 and 2006, we would get some notifications and other times we wouldn't. And I observed the meeting happening on the pavement outside between the farmer, the poison supplier, and the farmer's attorney. And the farmer, in essence, said to the poison supplier, make a list of everything we use, but not the LD50. I had no idea what LD50 was, so I rushed inside and I phoned CropLife. CropLife didn't want to tell me what the LD50 was, and I threatened them with a subpoena to the High Court if they didn't tell me. And it turned out that LD50 was the lethal dose to kill half the population that the pesticide was exposed to. Why would he be hiding that? So what we did is we forced him to give us a list of what he'd been spraying, and that was furnished to our attorneys, who then furnished it to me. I ran it past Prof. London at UCT, who informed me that a lot of what was on the list had been banned in 65 countries. Quite a few of them were World War II neurotoxin derivatives. Prof. London kind of spelled out the law in Act 36 of 1947. And this is 2004, 2005. And we gave the farmer many opportunities to come and meet and find a solution. And he kept on rejecting all those opportunities. What we were doing was setting a paper trail that we were being reasonable. We wanted to have an amicable solution, and he was the one who's being unreasonable. It ended up that we had to take him to the High Court, and we sent him his subpoena in, I think, September, October 2006 to appear in the Cape High Court. We couldn't take it to the local magistrates court because the farmer's attorney's wife was the chief public prosecutor. So we knew that if we took it to a local court, it would go nowhere. So we took him to the Cape High Court. We didn't ask him to do anything unreasonable. All we asked was for him to obey the law. We didn't need to prove that there was spray drift because we had videos showing it. We didn't need to prove that what he was spraying was poisonous because we had the list of what he'd been spraying, and we had the World Health Organization's categorization of those particular pesticides, ranging from 1A, which is highly, highly toxic, down to the 3s and the 4s. We won the court case. He agreed to settle and basically give us what we wanted, and what we wanted was him to obey the law, for him to obey the product label, and to keep his pesticides in his vineyards. The day after that, he went in contravention of that in front of Cape Town's photographers, and he continued spraying willy-nilly. That continued obviously in 2007, 2008, 2009. December 2007, I went into cardiac and respiratory arrest after being sprayed with an unknown pesticide that blew through an open window. I ended up again in CPR. They electric paddled me to bring me back to life. I spent several days in hospital and 2 weeks in bed. Following that, I went for more tests, and I was told by the specialists that we will not survive another summer of spraying. So that's early 2008. My wife at that stage was 30. She ended up in Paarl Mediclinic with pesticide-induced arthritis and kidney problems from the pesticides, proven. So what we then did was put the house on the market and make plans to get the hell out, not only of the town, but out of the country. Because at that stage, a contract had been taken out on my life by the farmer to have me bumped off for costing him $5 million a year. So we left the country under duress in 2010. They were after us, and in 2012, my oldest son and I, he was 11 at the time, got cancer from clothing that was hanging on our washing line that had been sprayed by the farmer. And when we wore it, it was summertime, our perspiration reactivated the poison and it burnt our skin off. So that's my oldest son. The little son, Christopher, obviously went to hospital 9 times in his first year of life. And he is now 16, and he's had delayed puberty from the reproductive and developmental toxins. to the point we've had to take him to specialists, and they've had to intervene with medication to jumpstart his puberty. So there are ongoing issues. I have an issue in 2012 again, where I was told I need 2 major brain operations. Otherwise, it wouldn't be long before I can't walk. I didn't have the brain operations. I'm still dealing with that, and I'm still fighting. Yeah, so that's the story. I think what made us win the case is we didn't insist on buffer zones, because if we'd said we want a 100-meter wide buffer zone, we would have no legs to stand on. It's been proven that spray can drift up to 7-8 kilometers. So buffer zones, depending on wind direction, don't work. My advice is gather evidence, video, get access to what's being sprayed in terms of product labels, be good, show that you're a good person, and set down a paper trail. And all you're wanting is for the law to be obeyed. The problem in the way things are done in South Africa is the current method of spraying with centrifugal crop sprayers, 8,000 liters of pesticide per hectare, is the normal. And everybody does it. It's the norm. You need to change the norm. Where I'm living now, that kind of spraying is illegal. And if spraying is done, even if a city council sprays the pavements for weeds, they have got to put up large signs notifying everybody that they're spraying. And by law, if they don't do that, they get sued by the government. They've also got to wear protective clothing. And if they're caught not wearing protective clothing, they get fined. That's the way things need to go. You need more regulation in South Africa. So that's probably all from me. I could go on for hours.
Thanks very much, and thanks for this case study. It's absolutely shocking, and I wish you well over the next period, Jürgen. And just to look at it from a legal point of view, something that you mentioned, which was that you subpoenaed the farmer to be transparent about the chemicals he was using. Is that a strategy that could be used for some of us living on the edge of these farms? I mean, how could we go about getting that kind of transparency and accountability around what is sprayed and when it's sprayed?
I think there's a clause in the Pesticide Management Act of 2011 which says you really need to notify people in the area in terms of what's being sprayed. I know that most of the product labels, which are the law under Act 36, say notify all inhabitants. So I think you could use those. And you could also use the Promotion of Access to Public Information Act, PAIA, to subpoena them to actually give you that information. If you're going to be exposed to something in the form of spray drift, you have every right to know what you're being sprayed with so that you can take the necessary precautions to protect your health. And that's the way we argued it. We said we have the right to know. However, we wanted to know what was being sprayed and when, so that we could leave the town for the duration of the spraying. And we did just that. But we'd get back from leaving the town for the entire day, get back at 5:30, and he would wait for us to get back, and then he would spray us. But it gets worse than that. Even if we hadn't been home, whatever he'd sprayed on his grapes, the residues were still there. The residues were all over our garden, over our fruit trees, over our vegetable patch, over our door handles, on our windows. And those residues dry. They dry on your lawn. When the wind blows, they get picked up and they're airborne once again in the form of pesticide-laden dust. So the only way around that is prevent that kind of spraying. Change the norm.
Thank you.
Yes, the question that I want to ask is about during this lockdown, we experienced a lot of illness like lung illness and also sinus. Can this be because we didn't move freely because we were locked in our houses? And the thing is that we thought that we had COVID-19, but it wasn't COVID-19. There's a lot of pesticides that the farmers are spraying, and people in where we are staying. And also, it's not only the pesticides, but the mines, the dust from the mine, the radiation, sand, the dust that is in the air, it affect us very, very badly. So we experience that a lot of people complain about the sinus infection that they had. Can this be because of not moving, that the lungs get enough exercise to breathe, or is it just because people, because of this pesticide that people inhale?
Where do you
Thank
live,
you.
Savine?
I'm staying in Lutzville, a small rural town in the West Coast, next to the 7 mines, and also to the farmers is surrounding our town in Lutzville. Thank you.
So with our work through TATIB and all the complaints and cries for help that we've received over the years, there's certainly been an increase in respiratory problems during spraying season. And those respiratory problems can be sinusitis, nasal irritation, upper respiratory tract irritation, asthma, and it peaks during the spraying season. The farmers would turn around and say, oh, it's hay fever. Well, before we moved to Rebecca Steele, we never got hay fever. We never had respiratory infections. We never had sinus infections. We never got asthma. And, you know, having lived there through their spraying seasons, we had all of those things. Doctors knew it. Doctors were hesitant to blame it on the spraying because the doctors were local doctors in that town, and if they said anything against the status quo, well, they would be tarred and feathered and marched out of town. But there's certainly a correlation. What can you do about it? There's no law enforcement. You know, we have Act 36 of 1947, which is old and outdated. You have no enforcement. We had several high court cases that were successful, and we had court orders in place. And despite that, the farmer continued spraying against the law. Those videos that you saw were post-court orders. And you could see that there was poison spraying across the roads. He just didn't care. And there was nobody to arrest him. Government and police and Department of Agriculture did not enforce their own law. And that needs to change. They need to enforce their law to protect all of us.
Thank you, Jürgen. I would really love to move on to SPP now and Henry for the community and farm workers that are in the West Coast. And it would be great to share the stories and experiences. Please feel free to speak in Afrikaans, whoever would like to present from SPP. Somebody else can translate if necessary, but many of us are comfortable with Afrikaans as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Henry. I work for SPP in the West Coast region based in Vredendal office. We mainly work with farm workers and farm dwellers. You can see in this picture there are 2 representatives from farm workers that we've got here, but let them introduce themselves first and then they'll share their stories.
Hi, I'm from the Matsikama Farm Workers Forum. I'm also a member of the Agrarian Reform for Food Sovereignty Campaign.
Hi, I'm working for the farm SPP and that's it.
Can you share maybe a story?
Yeah.
Reality on the farms and spray drift.
Ja, ek sal my stukkie in Afrikaans doen.
Ja.
Ja, soos ek gesê het, ek is Mina. Ons het 'n plaaswerkersforum wat met die regte van plaaswerkers werk. Ons werk met uitsettings, ons werk met alle labor issues op die plase. Ja, en so ook alle probleme wat op die plase is. Omdat ek op 'n plaas bly, het ek eerstehandse ervaring oor gifstowwe. Baie kere, soos op die plase daar waar ons werk, die boere gee geen veiligheidsklere vir die mense om aan te trek, terwyl hulle spuit nie. Hulle het geen maskers nie, hulle het geen oorpakke om aan te trek nie, en sodoende is daar baie probleme wat gesondheid betref. Baie van die mense het longprobleme, soos wat Wien gesê het, baie mense het probleme met sinus en asma. Ek is self 'n asma leier, en ek het baie sinusprobleme, en ek dink dit gaan gepaard met die gifwe wat gebruik word. Want baie kere as die landerye so baie na aan die huise, dat as jy binne in jou huis sit en dit word gespuit, dan kom daai gif word letterlik in jou huis ingewy. Jou hele huis ruik net te gif, en daai gif ruik staan vir lank in jou huis. En as jy werk, soos byvoorbeeld die werkers op die plase, as hulle werk en daar word gespuit, hulle word nie eenkant gesit en dan word dit klaar gespuit nie. Dit word gespuit terwyl die mense nog in die landerye besig is om te werk. En daai gifstowwe word ingeasem, wat maak baie mense wat op die plase werk, ly aan TB, en hulle het longprobleme, soos ek reeds al genoem het. Ja, en dit is baie problematies. Ek weet van een van my tantes het ook gewerk op 'n plaas, en elke keer wanneer voor daar tomaties geplant word, 'n sekere tyd van die jaar, dan word daar sekere gifstowwe word in die grond ingeploeg. En ek weet sy het op 'n stadium met sy agter op 'n trekker gesit op 'n ploeg, en sy het 'n drom gif het sy in haar hand gehou, wat sy in die grond moes strooi. En van die gif het omgeval, en dit het op haar been geval. En die gif het 'n groot gat in haar been veroorsaak. En sy het jare het sy met daai gat in haar been geloop, en daai gat het nie sommer gesond geraak nie, en die boere was so traag geweest om haar na dokter toe te vat en so. Ja, en dit is die probleme wat baie van die mense ook face op die plase. Daar is geen veiligheid as dit by die werk van gifstowwe kom. Baie mense word geaffekteer.
Can you share your story?
Okay. Okay. En op 'n warm weekdag, was in die somertyd, was parstyd geweest, en een van die mannetjies, hulle het 'n opdrag gekry om 'n tou in die solar te gaan haal. En hy het die opdrag uitgevoer om die tou te gaan haal, en dit was baie warm geweest, hy was baie dors, en gewoonlik is in die store op die solar is gewoonlik 500 ml kookbottels, of nie net kookbottels nie, maar daar's gewoonlik wat vol water staan. En toe hy nou op die bottel afgekom met die, wat hy nou dink is water afgekom, en toe hy nog gedrink van dit, en hy begin 'n brand en te kere gegaan en aangegaan, en toe hulle besef dit is chemical gemeng met suur. Maar dit het skoon water gelyk, en hy het nog van dit gedrink, en in daai tyd wat hy so aangaan bo op die solar, en van die werkers was ons nou ook nog daar van die manne wat vir hom gehelp het, en hulle het die boer gaan sê, en met die wat hulle na die boer gaan sê, het die inspekteurs ook gekom om 'n inspeksie te doen vir die druiwe, en hulle het toe vir hom weggesteek. Terwyl toe hulle die inspekteure nou klaar hulle se werk gedoen het, en klaar inspeksie gedoen het, en weer teruggekeer waarvan hulle kom, toe hulle vir hom toe halfpad gejaag met hom, van hulle die ambulans gebel, gejaag met hom, en die ambulans het hom halfpad gekry op die grond wat melk omvat. En hy is hospitaal toe, by die hospitaal kom by Vredendal, het hulle van direct op, dadelik het hulle van gestuur op Tygerberg hospitaal toe, Hy het dadelik operasie begin waar hy onder pype was, in sy keel is 'n gat gemaak en in sy sy is 'n gat gemaak om die melk te deurdreef na sy liggaam toe om die gif uit te kry. En hy het vir 2 maande so hospitaal in en hospitaal uit. Na die tweede maand het hy gesterwe aan die wonde, want die gif aan sy liggaam kan dit nie meer gevat het nie, want hy het al swakker en nagte uitgegaan. Hy het net sy 2 maande sy salaris gekry en die boer het ook vir hom gesê, maar hy moet stil bly, hy moet nie oor dit praat nie. En hy het so gedoen, hy het nie gepraat oor nie, niemand het gepraat oor nie, want vir hom was het geweest, as hy nou ook gaan praat, gaan hy as hy recht om werk het of nie meer werk het nie. Hy was in 'n twyfel geweest en voor hy gesterf het, het hy 'n brief geskrywe en dit vir sy pa gegee. En dit is nou my story.
Maybe just from our perspective, there's a lot of abuses and malpractices that is happening on farms, but we as an organization, we don't specifically intervene in these cases. So there are lots of sad stories and practices on these farms. So we see it as a great opportunity to engage in this campaign, also to look at what's it that we can contribute from our side to address this matter.
Thank you. I've got some questions. I'd love to know how often the workers on the farms have to spray and are exposed. I'd love to know what education and training has been given around understanding what it is they're spraying, and whether there is healthcare or any clinics accessible. So that's 3 questions in one.
Op die meeste plase wat ek nou al was, eerstens word daar geen opleiding gegee oor watter gifstowwe hulle gebruik nie. En daar word op 'n gereelde basis word daar gespuit. So dit hang af van die gewasse wat geplant word, maar op 'n gereelde basis word gespuit. Soos nou in die tyd wat dit miskien soos die blomkool, die 'n kool wat hulle vir Syngenta plant, word dit gewoonlik elke week word gespuit. En ja, mense het geen opleiding van gifstowwe nie. Hulle weet ook nie, ken ook nie die gevare daarvan nie. En soos ek gesê het, daar word geen veiligheidsklere gegee nie. Die klinieke is ver en as iemand siek raak op die plase deur middel van gif, dan moet hulle nog hulle eie planne maak om by die klinieke of by die dokters uit te kom, want die boere stuur hulle aan nie.
I really hope that all of us can come together. I know that there are other communities that are going to be sharing their stories and experiences. But my hope and intention that we all share is that the dialogue starting can help empower everybody affected in all the communities. So thank you very much, SPP. Thank you. It would be great to move on.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Simpiwe. I'm working for an NGO, Kanyisa Education Trust. We are based in PE. Of course, our work is in peri-urban areas and farming areas around PE. Those will be in the areas that produces citrus, that is Kocha municipal area, as well as Science River Valley. So we work with farm workers and farm dwellers, and of course, we also work with small-scale farmers. And now we began to start to work around pesticides last year. Of course, our work was some research which we done jointly with one of our funders. The process of going around the farms, we came into contact with situations where farm workers had problems around being exposed to pesticides. This, for example, will lead to them having problems in relation to breathing, headache, developing rash, and also problems in relation to water for consumption on those farms. We know of situations where, for example, one farm worker in Badensi in Kocha municipal area ended up in hospital for 6 months. The worker developed TB after being exposed to pesticides. We also know of other worker in Pansy Farm who doctor said that because of being exposed to pesticides, there were health problems. He could not breathe properly, for example. We know of one worker in one of other farms also in the same municipal area who died on the spot, just opening up a can. Workers have been telling us about this can where if you open it, you mustn't be close to it, so must inhale it. In one other farm, we were told the workers were reporting that there was this farmer was spraying with a helicopter while they were on duty, and how this would lead them to have a headache, rash, and all those questions. And when they raised these issues, the bosses would not dare to listen to them. So those are some of the issues that we have been uncovered or made aware. Of course, because the research we were doing with Rosala Lassenberg was part of the research they've been doing with other partners in Germany and in Brazil. Of course, the focus was on their big companies, BASF. BASF, there is also another multinational company, is BASF and Bayer. Some of the ingredients that were used in some of these farms, I think there were 3 farms were identified. Silver Valley and in Kocha municipal areas. These were outlawed or not approved in the EU, but of course they were. There were no regulation on this in South Africa. So then therefore this was linked to the campaign they were undertaking in Germany. So hence the target was the companies, BASF and Bayer. What you have done this year, just before COVID-19, we work with farm workers to take up this, to look at more of these incidents. So what we did therefore was to have a 2-day session with farm workers where we were looking at talking about this, and also to start to begin a process in which they can identify some chemicals and their impact. As part of the research we have been undertaking. Then those products identified, we share them with an IOA at their base in Johannesburg. We asked them to look at whether there could be any pesticides or ingredients which are banned, and also as well as to look at whether there are some of these which they could, because of the poison health, could they, for example, be classified as not being appropriate to be used by workers. Of course, the report has been recommending that the need for more collaboration between stakeholders, workers, and the department and farm owners, as well as undertakings. I mean, more trainings around awareness raising and of course, the report also raised the fact that much of the legislation is a bit old, all those questions. Of course, that is just one part of the report. We are wanting also to look at some of the legislation which might be in the EU, and whether it could compare it with our legislation. Yeah, of course, this is still ongoing. So we were hoping, our hope was that out of this research we can get relevant stakeholders. This could be Department of Health and Labor, workers, and farm owners and farm managers into a common space where workers, where the research is tabled, and then there could be also engagement in relation to what comes out of that research. That is where we are going. Of course, that is where we are now at the moment. Yes, I'm done.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
I would like to move on to Ansune.
Hi, so yeah, I live in Stellenbosch. I've had a long history of actually also being exposed to chemicals that's being sprayed on farms where I was completely healthy. It was in 2007. I was completely healthy. I worked on a wine farm that was close to the strawberry farming area, and basically it felt like my whole body got turned up inside out, and I actually started from, like I said, being completely healthy to getting panic attacks, severe eczema. I think there was definitely some kind of form of neurotoxin that was being sprayed at that time. And basically now, a couple of years down the line, I wanted my children to go to a Waldorf school. It's on a great, beautiful farm. The problem is it's surrounded by the strawberry farms. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use the name of the farms. But basically these strawberry farms are surrounded, and there's only one road that actually go to Spear, where my children go to school. It's not, so there's no way to avoid the strawberry farms, and they basically spray from June to November. Sometimes they spray almost every day. When it's like really like September, October, they spray almost every day. You can hear I've got sinuses now, really battling with sinuses at the moment, and I'm thinking it's definitely due to the spraying. So my concern is for my children that goes to school. Like Jürgen said, spray drift or chemicals there can be a spray drift up to 8 kilometers. So that's quite far. And on hot days, I mean, it must actually be even worse if it's like on a hot day and these chemicals, I don't know, it just, yeah, you could actually smell it more. So my concern is for my children, my concern is also for my health, and my concern, sometimes I just think of these poor workers. I can drive past, I'm not there on the field the whole time, and I just think there must be more to protect the people who actually work on the farms. And the other thing is also that it's they spray on a busy main road. Like I said, there's hundreds of people driving past, all being exposed to the chemicals. And I just think, yeah, people should be more concerned and put more pressure on what is being done. And yeah, so basically that's my story and how I'm involved today.
Thank you, Ansune. I think one of the alarming things just also about your story that was highlighted was how close the school is to the spraying, and I believe that the Sustainability Institute is also very close to the spraying. And I'm sure that there are lots of schools and and very vulnerable people of the communities that live around the farms that are exposed and not protected or considered.
Exactly. And sorry, I just want to mention that, yeah, we never know what they're spraying, and that's a concern. You never know. Should you close your windows, or, you know, like I do close my windows, but I mean, there's so many people driving past, and we don't know what's being sprayed.
Thank you. There has been, I know there's a lot of talk going on about the legal stuff, and I just wanted to share with everybody the legal submission. So last year, SAOSO, Sasha and Colleen, through Climate Reality, put together a submission that spoke about Act 36, and as well as a legal submission that went in by The Real Thing last year. And some of this activity has helped to reignite work that has been done for so long by so many others. And it's helped to be a catalyst in bringing us together today. So just so that you guys are aware of the submission that can help with the legal process. It called for the modernizing of the outdated legal framework, that the laws haven't been updated since 1947, but our industry has definitely progressed very fast since then. To build capacity in government departments to regulate, monitor and manage agrochemicals more effectively with intergovernmental cooperation and public engagement. Very importantly, to remove the secrecy and instill transparency to the sector with regards to our health, the environment, and the risks of these agrochemicals. And something that I'd love to add today, yesterday or the day before, the Amadiba community in Eastern Cape won a great victory against the Department of Minerals and Natural Resources, I think they're called, which has awarded them the right to see the mine's proposals for everything that they're going to be doing or that they want to do in the area. Because up until now, I find it incredible that communities exploited have never been allowed to see the plans of what will happen when development or mines or international companies come in to exploit human and natural resources. So that win, I think, will really be important for what we're hoping to energize as well. Transparency is really important. Also to enforce periodic review of agrochemical registrations, to simplify and speed up the process for non-toxic alternative product registration. So this is really important. As we transition away, we really need to be able to offer people an alternative. To implement and coordinate cradle-to-grave monitoring of agrochemicals, to educate and communicate effectively with the public about food and environmental safety, and to fulfill the public's right to know, including by public participation in the process of regulation of agrochemicals, the public's access to product testing information and the registration process, to align the product registration system with the requirements of the right to administrative justice, to improve the labeling requirements and ensure that the hazards of the chemicals are effectively communicated to the end user, which we've heard from the farm workers and others involved that definitely is not happening, and to implement public awareness and education initiatives. So that's what the submission is calling for. It's in our shared document. I'm happy to also share with the people on this Zoom. If there are any other questions, pop them in the chat. And now it would be great to move on to Pilar and Marika from the Eastern Cape, who have been fighting against the aerial spraying of the cannabis crops. Great.
Hello.
Hi, great.
Can you hear me?
Marika. Fabulous.
We can hear you.
So I've just been chatting to Pilla, and we decided I will just share a little overview and history from the Umzimvubu Farmer Support Network when we started. Yeah, my name is Marika Meiring, and I was part of the original team that started with the Umzimvubu Farmer Support Network in 2015. And that time we responded to this need that's been ongoing to bring an end to the toxic spraying of crops in the Eastern Cape by the South African Police Services. That was going on for more than 20 years, nearly unchecked. First it was the military that sprayed people on their land, and then it went over to the South African Police Services. There were many accounts of abuse of the people from military days through with the South African Police Service, and that's just terrific. So that was carrying on for 20 years, and there was nothing really being done about it. And a large reason for that was that these communities are very remote. You know, data connectivity is very small, and access to the public space was very limited. So the farmers just continued taking it and continued to grow the cannabis, as this was the only thing that they could do to create any money for themselves. The only other jobs potentially for people in the areas are working at schools or in government posts. So this was the only way that anybody could basically earn anything, and mothers would grow this in order to send their kids to school. So this was why it continued for all this time, and we then came in basically just responding to this desperate need, and connected with Ricky Stone, a lawyer who decided he would champion this cause, and that was very useful to have his backing. So a strategic, the strategy that we used ultimately that kind of evolved, and that was very successful with the UFSN's work, which affected in the spraying being stopped in these areas. Not officially, but it was halted by the police. And the strategy that evolved out of our work was a dual strategy of bringing in media to share people's stories, because of this thing that it was all happening quite silently. We started just connecting with people we knew, people that we could link in with, media that was interested, and showing them the area, taking them in physically and introducing them to the community so that people could share their stories. And together with this, Ricky started writing to the police. The lawyer started writing letters using the Promotion of Access to Information Act, and asking them, or ordering them with that act to share the information that they use to make the decision that using toxic sprays would be the way to deal with this supposed legal problem. And that was very effective, because obviously it made them very scared that they would be seen, and they did share some information ultimately with the lawyer, and we managed to see and read through that. What was very interesting from those documents was that the spraying in the Eastern Cape over the farmers, the cannabis farmers, seemed to be part of trials for the agro industry. That before that time, the chemicals were not trialed, and they used these episodes, yearly episodes of spraying as some kind of trial to bring it into the agro industry. We also already knew that the South African police was not following the manufacturer protocols to safely spray. And these are, for instance, to mark the area before spraying, to warn people that spraying will happen, and to clear the area of any people and animals for the duration of the spray, and a day, I think, after and prior. None of those were actually employed by the police, and in fact there were accounts of people getting sprayed directly, seemingly intentionally, when they were seen in the fields, and we could only imagine that this was because the police helicopter pilots were feeling that these people were trespassing the law and deserved to be sprayed for some reason. So as with the farm workers, this was just horrific, and the effect that this has had over an incredibly rich area. In fact, it's part of the biome, one of the small number of places in the world that is said to be incredibly rich in fauna and flora, and needs to be protected in order for the earth to stay healthy. And so tons of toxins have been sprayed over these areas. We've also had reports of spray getting dumped when the planes still have toxic spray left, the spray getting dumped, and that's been seen to happen over forest areas. So that was quite horrific. That's pretty much all that I'd like to share, I think, as just an overview of the history and how UFSN got involved with the strategy. There's a couple of videos I'd like to share. Yes, so there's the first one. It's called Traditional Cannabis Growers' Thoughts.
Sayibeka imeko ekaphephela emotha echamelisa insangu noma kukhumbona akachamelisa ikhanyelo lensangu kuba ikho mthethweni nyani ngokuba ngokusebenza kwakhe ifika impahla idle njobe echama nalapha engcene engachameli pha kuphela idle impahla nemfuyo yenkomo ifele impahla khakhalala leli liyeza balithela kulensangu kuba bebengagadi baba bachamisela insangu kuphela bathela bathula semanzini sisidla amanzi bebuya beza kulamanzi sakhalaza ke umuntu simbona ngona ethe futhi sithi kungenxa yegama leli enibona usizi lethu kule ndawo njengoba iphuma ke abantu abakwethu iziphumela ke sisebenze ke isiphumelele le miqulo ukuthi yenziwe utha kuzobika ngento ebesingazi ba into ba amahlahla ngavala into esiphumela lapha sezaba masihle sivala ngamahlahla kwantu sikhusele pha hayi ukuthi akukho iplace ezibezobiyela asizifuni abantu abakwethu asizifuni kwazona kulunga amahlahla abantu abakwethu kubize sihle sichola pha siyalamba lo mhlaba nje bamasimi amilinga ngenxa ngomkhombona siyalamba lo mhlaba uba yikho yanto singabhubha sesiphekha le ndawo ungabikho muntu sisathi abantu okusithetheleni kuba siyahluka le ndawo nyani zona sibheke sithe kulo mgongo
esinokuba sibe nenayisense apha eCamp ngeke sibuye sibe nayo imali yonke uba nje thina singayilima ngokusemthethweni singafana noba siyekile kanti thina into ebesiyikhalazela ibikukuchanyeliswa kwensangu uphephela uphephela ukufika kwakhe eqala ukufika apha wayephethe obhutshu ephethe ipetlo amagqoko anento zokuthisa insangu phayisiye afika igawule pha yenziwe amabibi ithela ipetroli ithiswe ngabelungu ingekho mthethweni savela insangu ikhona kodwa ingazange yabasemthethweni. Xa kuthiwa singavuma uba mayibe semthethweni, ingaba kuthiwa masibe siyekile, sibe sizodlani ke thina ngoba asisebenzi, asixhamli nto, siphelele kule nzama.
All right. Yeah, so the other video was a video of Greek Zweni, who is also part of the UFSN, speaking and sharing it was at the Canatech conference, but I don't think that is critical to view. So I think Pilasande can share the overview in isiXhosa and other points that she might like to share. And then I can also answer any questions if there are.
Yes, thank you. I just basically want to go over it again in isiXhosa because to consider all the Amadiba community people who are present at this meeting. Ndizibulisele kuni bantu bakuthi nonke enilapha enizixhamlileyo naza kule ndawo. Mna ndinguphila Sande Mahlakatha wakumzimvubu Farmers Support Network. Ndisebenzisana nequmrhu elaqala ukuzimanya ngonyaka ka-2015. Isizathu sokubana sidibane side sibe sivelisa eli qembu kwakukuhlukumezeka kwabantu abalima intsango emampondweni. Njengoba ndisitsho siqale le nto ngo-2015, kuba siqonda ubana masizise amagqwetha neentatheli nabo bonke abantu abanothi bancedise ukuvakalisa lo mba ubuhlungu kangaka ubukade usehlela abantu kungathethwa ngawo. Sathi uba senze ngolo hlobo safumana igqwetha elinguricky Stone, oye wakwazi uvele abhalele amapolisa ngoko nangoko awaxelele ukuba ngokomthetho le nto yokuchamelisa amasimi ngentsangu ayivumelekanga, ngoba ke saye safumanisa ubana kwale poison glyphosate ibingavumelekanga kwamanye amazwe, yayekwa ukusetyenziswa ngesizathu sokuthi yaziwa uba iyabagulisa abantu, ikakhulukazi xa izochanyeliswa phezu kwemifula, phezu kwegadi ezinokudla kwabantu, abantu abazaphinda baxhomekeke kuko uba bakudle. Ngenxa yoba ke nayo u-South African Police eyazi ukubana ngokomthetho abanokwazi ukuqhubeleka, babe bagqibelisile ke ngoku ukufika emasimini ngaloo nyaka ka-2016 emveni kobana siqalile ukuthetha nabo, sixhumene nabo ngokwendlela yokubabhalela. Siye safumanisa ke ukubana xa sihamba sithetha sincokola nabantu kwezi communities zohlukileyo, safumanisa ubana abantu zininzi izinto abathe bazifumanisa zitshintshile ezimpilweni zabo ngenxa yale poison. Umhlaba awusavelisi ukudla njengesiqhelo, nabo ulusu labo liya-afektheka, banereshi, izifuba zabo azisaphilanga kakuhle, abanye baqalisa bahamba izibhedlele, baqalisa bafumana i-medication zee-TB esikrokrela ukubana zivele ngokwenxa yokuba be-exposed to ezi chemicals. Abanye baripota ukuba izilwanyana zabo ziqalisa ukungazali ngendlela eqhelekileyo, ziyaphuma izisu ebantwini nasezilwanyaneni. Satsho ke saqonda ubana kufuneka ke ngoku sibe nendlela yokuqokelela ezi zitori, siziqokelele ngenjongo yokuthi xa kunokwenzeka mhlawumbi le nto yokuchamelisa amasimi iqhubeleke, sikwazi ukubana simchallenge urhulumente sisebenzisa ezi ncwadi nezi findings esizithatha directly ebantwini from i-communities. Enye into esixhalabisayo ke ngoku nge-communities ezilima intsangu, sixhalabiswa kukuthi kukhona le bill intsha ifikayo ekuthiwa umntu ngamnye uyoze avumeleke ukulima izihlahla ezine okanye ezisibhozo kungenjalo uba ufunyanwa enezihlahla ezingaphezulu kwesibhozo uzawuvalelwa ayejele for ixesha elingangeminyaka eyi-15. Ngoku loo nto iyasixhalabisa kakhulu siyi-UFSN. Yinto ke ngoku esenza ubana sifune uqhubeleka sithi siyilwe le nto ideklarishwe as illegal. Kuvele kuthiwe nje ayikho semthethweni ukubana kuchanyeliswe amasimi ngeglyphosate. Ngenxa yobana uba le bhili ingaqhubeleka ibe ngumthetho ngolu hlobo ime ngalo, ithetha ubana amapolisa anothi akwazi ukubuya, abuye ngegunya nangomthetho odlulisiweyo othi ubungafanelekanga kakade uba unentsimi yonke yentsangu. And therefore batsho babuye ngophephela baphinde futhi bayiqale phantsi laa nto babe sebeyiyekile ngenxa yoba siye sababhalela. So ibaluleke kakhulu ke kuthi ke ngoku siliqembu ukubana sikwazi ukudibaniselana nee-communities ezi-affected. Sitsho kuba masidibaniselaneni sithetheni into enye, simchallenge urhulumente, simsuwishe uba kuyanyanzeleka khona ukuze afikelele kwisigqibo esithi ukuchamelisa amasimi ngale chemical akusekho semthethweni. I think I will leave it there for now. I think I've covered pretty much what Marika has given as an overview, and the fact that we would still like to continue pursuing legal action to declare spraying of glyphosate on fields as illegal, because there is now a proposed bill that is proposing that cannabis farmers in rural communities can only ever grow 4 up to 8 plants, and should they be growing more, we are in fear that perhaps the police can still come back and continue with the glyphosate spraying program. So we are together in the movement of saying it should be declared illegal altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilar. I saw today, I'm not sure if it was addressing exactly what you're talking about, but Dear Me, South Africa, there's currently a call for voices to be added about personal, I think, marijuana cultivation, yes. If anybody can verify that. So I think everybody on this Zoom can add their voices. If somebody can share the link maybe to the Dear Me campaign, that would be great as well.
Let me try and do that very quickly, because the Dear Me South Africa is coming from an NPO, and then there is one that is coming directly from Parliament. Okay. That is calling for submissions, and it is suggesting that people can also submit, it's not a link, people can also submit verbally. I'm not sure how that's gonna go, but we are kind of hoping, we are making calls and just finding out from them exactly how to go about doing that. I'm just going to copy.
Thanks, Pilar. I'm going to cut you off there because we've reached 12 o'clock. So if you can pop that in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody else.
And thank you. Cheers, everybody. It's been lovely meeting you all.